If you look at the adoption curves of Bitcoin, it's exceeding internet adoption, it's exceeding cell phone adoption at the same point in those technologies, because that's what Bitcoin is. It's a technology.
Bitcoin base layer, Lightning, whatever other layers could exist, any entity that starts interfacing with those systems now starts interfacing with every other kind of environment, money ecosystem in the world that is also tied into that system. And so, for example, cashapp is got a very large set of users, and by incorporating into the Bitcoin and Lightning network, they start connecting to other ecosystems around the world without even necessarily knowing it. Now, there still can be frictions on that in terms of like KYC, AML, and kind of these artificial restrictions that start go on top of that. But the point is, I think that basically having these open source layers that can connect different monetary ecosystems together and bypass their artificial kind of firewalls.
It's possible it'll stop on a dime, and then it maybe becomes a hobby. But for me, it's the perfect form of insurance. So why would the perfect form of insurance stop on a dime? What you know for sure is that fiat is debasing. Again, I gave you 100% certainty that fiat's debasing. Yeah. What is your protection? Well, you're going to say, I'm going to go into another digital asset. Okay, it only has 10 million coins, but the only people trading it are Daniel and Foss. There's no security in that network, whereas Bitcoin has the most secure computer network in the world. So is it likely that the adoption continues? Yes. Is it certain? No. The only certainty is fiat debasement. Everything else is uncertain. But if you know the fiat debasement with certainty, and the best tool to protect against that is Bitcoin, well, that's how you formulate a probability distribution that says you better own more than 0 Bitcoin, okay? I don't care how much you own, but if you own 0, that is the wrong amount. Yeah. You got to own more than 0. Blackrock is buying Bitcoin on behalf of clients. It's not like Blackrock, this institution, has $7 trillion or $10 trillion itself. That's all client money. BlackRock exists to take a fee off of that client money, but it's not like they have $10 trillion. My God, Apple itself, the most valuable company in the world, is only worth $3 trillion. It's not like BlackRock is worth $10 trillion. You guys got to understand the difference between an asset manager and the clients that actually own the assets. Okay? So I'm not that concerned. It's part of the financial machine. I think it's good for adoption. I actually do believe not your keys, not your coins, but it's a process. People get onboarded in different ways. Ultimately, they may find their way to this self-custody, but I promise you, there's many treasurers and many corporate or pension allocators that are going to be very comfortable buying Bitcoin through BlackRock rather than doing their own self-custody with multi-sig wallets as their first trade in Bitcoin. It's an adoption process, Daniel. I'm not that concerned about it, but that's because the protocol is decentralized. Will there be large players and concentration of large amounts of Bitcoin? There always has been, and yes, there probably always will be. But that's what makes a market. Doesn't mean the protocol is at risk.
Wherever you go in the world, people are monetizing other things because they don't want to hold just money. Especially in this kind of last 15 years of zero interest rate policy. So they say, okay, well, I want to buy this really expensive real estate instead. I want to buy this really expensive equities instead. And of course, there are places for all of those. I mean, I have real estate and I have equities. But it's like in Egypt, for example, people will buy another home and it's just sitting there empty because they're like, well, I'm not going to like invest in the local stock exchange because it's not as reliable as like the US market. And I'm not going to hold cash or bonds. So I guess it's real estate. It's either real estate, gold coins, or physical cash dollars they got in the gray market. That's kind of that's like their options. And so and in the United States, we just shovel money into our 401ks and just monetize the S&P 500.
Yeah.
And that has some distortion effects on business formation and things like that. And in some countries, it's it's a lot of it's you get real estate bubbles because of that. People say, well, I want to hold something that's outside of this jurisdiction, or I want to hold that, and you kind of drive up certain prices beyond what they should be in a healthier environment, and those are just kind of they distort things. And then the other problem that Bitcoin solves for some people that those of us in the West generally are less aware of is the payments issue. So, for example, um, there's something like 40 currencies in Africa. There's like 30 currencies in Latin America. Um, and it can be non-trivial, for example, to send money from Nigeria to Kenya, right? Or the cost to do so end up being just non-trivial. And that should be it's 2023. That should be trivial. And the interesting thing about things like Bitcoin is that it just can bridge that gap. So like apps can work with each other as long as they have internet connection and just have this kind of shared open source way of communicating with each other in a way that's not really working for a lot of people right now. So, those of us in the United States or Canada or Europe, we generally don't have that many payment frictions on a regular basis. Sometimes if we send an international wire, we'll be reminded how antiquated some of this is. But other than that, we generally don't go around every day thinking, like if only I had better payments. Only around the margins do we see it. But in a lot of countries, it's non-trivial. And then especially when you do think of this global scale, when you think of global remittances, when you think of like apps and money systems being able to communicate with each other across borders, I think all of that can get way better. And I think a really good analogy is email. So like every like webmail client can talk to other webmail clients because they're using the same open source underlying protocols. They don't have to like Yahoo and Gmail don't have to get together and make sure that their systems are compatible. They just have to make sure that their systems are compatible with the underlying open source. And so when you have open source, Bitcoin base layer, Lightning, whatever other layers could exist, any entity that starts interfacing with those systems now starts interfacing with every other kind of environments, money ecosystem in the world that is also tied into that system. And so, for example, cashapp has got a very large, set of users, and by incorporating into the Bitcoin and Lightning network, they start connecting to, other ecosystems around the world without even necessarily knowing it. Now, there still can be frictions on that in terms of like KYC, AML, and kind of these artificial restrictions that start go on top of that. But the point is, I think that basically having these open source layers that can connect different monetary ecosystems together and bypass their artificial kind of firewalls, I think changes a lot and mostly for the better.